Tour is to discover the universe, to discover your universe from the inside and out. And as I was introducing you, we were discussing the fact that you're one of those first pioneers that went out into space and actually explored explored our universe, albeit to the moon. One of the first 12 people to actually walk on the moon. And then on your way back from the moon, you had a very, I guess, a metaphysical experience on the way back from the moon, and that's almost an inner journey of sorts. So you comprise both aspects of the theme of this tour of discovering the universe from inside and out. I just wanted you to tell the audience gathered here, if you could, what experience did you have on the moon? What changed you? And what do you think the mechanisms of that change were?
Okay, I cannot totally explain the mechanism. However, it's been in our human vocabulary for centuries because there's words for it going back pre, well, back in historical times. And in the ancient Sanskrit, the experience is called salvakapa samadhi. In the Greek language, it's called metanoia. In the Buddhist, it was satori, or enlightenment. So these are all words going back at ancient times, explaining these types of experiences. Are you having trouble with the sound? Can you hear me okay? Okay. You were getting what I was saying then. Okay. So I was interested in, before I went to the moon, I had been following the work of Dr. J.B. Rhine at Duke University here in the United States, who had been doing work in parapsychology and psychic stuff. And we hadn't really had that understood in terms of good science. But nevertheless, I started digging into it with some of the well-educated people that I knew, and we found that we have historical experiences and like I said, in the Sanskrit it's called salvakapa samadhi, in the Greek metanoia, in the others satori, but consciousness at that point was not in our modern scientific vocabulary. It was only it was kind of avoided after Descartes in the 15th century, but it's taken us all the 20th century to understand the quantum world and recognize that's what we're dealing with. And so that's what my Noetic Foundation has been all about, was developing the exploration of these type of phenomena. But now that we have quantum mechanics, we now understand that awareness is the first step. In other words, plants and animals of all sorts have awareness. The question is, how far up the ladder of complexity do you go? And that's when we get from all plants and all animals are aware, but as you get up to more complex phenomena, like what we human, and we find many animals are doing the same thing. They have their complexities also. They just don't write about it the way we do. So that's where we are, and it's because of my work and my founding my Noetic Foundation 40 years ago to explore this further. That's where all of this came from on my end. Over to you.
So in founding the Noetic Science Institute, and it was based off of your experiences personally, have you found that, the concept of what you originally thought of it as has evolved since in these last years since you found that?
Well, yes, I think the science, now that we have established a science and realize we're dealing with a quantum phenomenon, all of that is added to our science, and my Noetic Foundation has worked in this now for 40 years since I founded it, and we are now there's, as far as I can tell, the last number, but we have 66 universities around the world that offer courses in this type of phenomenon and that are making studies in this phenomenon.
Dr. Mitchell, I just wanted to know if you think there was any special mechanism or something physical that happened to you because of your voyage to the moon, meaning because you left the gravitational bonds of Earth and stepped foot on another planetary object, whether or not consciousness there was sort of one how or another sparked, instigated, if something different, some mechanism actually physically happened to you because of that experience.
I don't think so. In that what we're experiencing here and what we think we understand is that these are simply the properties built into our system, into the nature of our system at a very basic level. And the fact that only in recent years, in the last 50 to 70 years, have we brought our science to bear on it, that's rather, uh, well, it's significant that it's taken us so long. That means it has just been there all along, and we haven't had the science to fully explain it like we would have liked to.
And Dr. Mitchell, I wonder what your view was on when we look at philosophy as it's grown over time and ancient religion, and how there's been all these, divisionary aspects to it, where it's been competing religious ideologies or philosophical ideologies. Do you think that we're in a time now where we've kind of come full circle, where we're using science and the scientific method and these new means of looking into these aspects, that this is a time of the unifying principle, or bringing everything back full circle again, where we can maybe end this fighting and squabbling over these questions, instead of maybe we can all
Well,
work together?
we may continue to fight and squabble over the answers to these questions for a long time, because that's what science is all about. Is I think it's this way, and the other guy says, well, let's add this to it. Somebody else says, let's add this to it. And eventually we start to get a more complete picture of what it is we're talking about. we've only been talking about consciousness in science for somewhere the last 40 years. And before that, it was not a proper subject in science.
You speak about the ancient knowledge of civilizations that have long passed, and bringing forward that information into today's age, and also blending it with the scientific aspect of consciousness, of understanding consciousness and understanding who we are and where we are going. Do you think that it's cyclical in nature, whereas basically we're basically returning back to our source when it comes to that information, where it is more holistic rather than quantifiable?
Well, I don't necessarily think that description is true. I think we in science our objective is to understand our world better. And so we keep adding this part, that part, different names for it. And it's only the fact that we now have proper technologies to investigate these phenomena that we didn't have before. And as you well know, we're getting new technologies every day that help us add bits and pieces and new knowledge and new ways of looking at this knowledge. And even though it's been the same phenomenon that people have been looking at for hundreds of years, we just have different ways of looking at it with the modern technologies we have.
Dr. Mitchell, I was wondering if you could maybe comment a little further on your actual trip. I mean, it was quite a while back, but do you remember any kind of like physical sensations when you were visiting the moon, or did that maybe, I guess Chris asked this earlier, did it spur this experience that you had internally, but was there any kind of physical feeling that you can remember?
Let's put it in the guys here, we had practiced and practiced and practiced everything that we were going to do on the moon before we got there. In other words, here at Cape Kennedy, we had set up our training system such that the only difference was one place would be on the moon, the other place was in Cape Kennedy. And we were using the equipment we would be using, the procedures we would be using, and what we didn't know, we just didn't have the data. In other words, it was a matter of getting the right data and doing it in the right circumstance. But when we went to the moon and were doing our experiences on the moon, and we had two periods on the moon, one in which we set up a science station out in front of the spacecraft. The second one was which we did a geology traverse outside the spacecraft and collected data for the scientists on Earth. But there was nothing that we hadn't practiced over and over and over again, make sure we had it down pat. And so it wasn't anything really new. It was in the sense that we weren't surprised by anything that was happening. We were just doing it the way we had done it in practice and just getting the results that we got. And so it was no different than somebody here on Earth going to a different part of our planet that they hadn't been in before and bringing about a report of exactly what they found there that was a little different than what they had at home.
So I don't know how far you want to go with this, but I understand training, the training you had to go through was exhaustive. And I can understand, the billions and billions of dollars spent on those lunar missions and the fantastic data that it did return. So was there ever a moment that because you were the lunar module pilot, because you were trained so rigorously in that mission, how did the conscious experience override that training? Because it seemed like you had an experience, and that was more after you left the lunar service on your way back to the moon?
Well, it was looking back at Earth, looking back at Earth and seeing it in the perspective of the heavens. And that was the new part of it, was seeing Earth in its perspective as being around our sun, as a planet around our sun, and just kind of, a new experience. We hadn't had that total experience. So the physics that I had studied was still applicable. We were just seeing it from a new perspective.
I don't know if you'd be able to answer this question. It's more of a creative question.
Give me a try.
If you were to take a paintbrush and canvas and you were to paint the experience, just a shape, an image, something very simple, in order to explain the inner feeling you had looking back at the Earth from space, what would that picture look like?
I can't answer that for you because I'm not that kind of an artist. But since my mother was an artist, a very good artist, I understand the question. I just say I don't have the capability to answer that the way you're asking it.
Well, I wanted to ask you this one then, Doctor. Given the state of things in terms of the world when we're talking about fossil fuels and sustainability and all these different things, what's your take on the current status of like 0-point energy, or what people call free energy? What's your results and what you've looked into and what you've investigated with your team in that matter?
Well, 0-point energy is one of my favorite subjects, and I've been working in it for some time. And that's because we realize that those of us who have studied the problem realize that our planet and our civilization is not on a sustainable path at the moment. We have overpopulated, we're over-consuming, and we've got to do something differently, or we're going to eat ourselves out of house and home over the next century. And so, yes, there are people, as you know, planning to go to Mars or to plant civilization further out, because we can't do it with what we've got. We are over-consuming and overpopulating, and we're going to have to do something differently. And so Those are the problems I work on.
Do you think then that the fact that we're in this situation now is by design? Is there some overarching establishment that is suppressing any sort of energy or technology that might free us?
No, I think hopefully we've got the technologies that are hoping to solve the problem. I don't think we're painting ourselves into a corner deliberately. That's just because the circumstances we're in, our population has grown from 1.9 billion at the beginning of the 20th century to almost 7 billion people now. And so our population is an overwhelming problem. And we've got to feed them, and we've got to keep people alive and move forward. We're going to eat ourselves out of house and home.
And given that we recognize that, and we recognize many problems that we face and that we're working on, I've always viewed it as this is a way that kind of spurs us into action. It almost seems like the human race needs to be pushed to the brink. I've just known this in my own life. There's certain things I always wanted to change personally about myself, but it was only when I was really shown that maybe what I was doing was hurting myself or whatever that it showed that I had to make that change. Humanity.
Well, it's the same thing. Same thing with the hardcore population.
Exactly. So, given all of that and everything that you're working on, would you have a message of hope or a message of inspiration to give to people, or anything to say to help motivate people to maybe take a look at these things and to give them hope about the future?
Of course, because we have the capability to solve the problems. We are developing the capability to go off our planet and to go beyond. And the evidence suggests that our extraterrestrial visitors who have been coming here for a long time have that capability. We just haven't developed it yet. And so our next step is to be able to go off our planet and to go beyond our planet, and perhaps even go outside of our solar system. And as you are well aware, there are Elon Musk and some of the great thinkers here, and with the means to help do something, are exploring off planet and exploring the ways to help us do that. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to get off this planet and go beyond it.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
You think
big round of applause.
You want?